Hello, and welcome to Pawsitive Pet Nutrition. Today we're going to be talking about reading pet food labels, which can be a very confusing and challenging topic to discuss. My name is Joye Sears, and I'm a registered veterinary technician and instructor at Dalhousie University. Just a note, I do also work as a pet nutrition advocate for Royal Canin Canada, and they are a pet food manufacturing company, but none of the information that I will be talking about today is branded or relates to that company in particular. So to get started, by the end of this presentation, I'm hoping that you will be able to recognize the common challenges that are associated with reading and interpreting pet food labels. So it's not going to make you an expert because I don't think there are very many people who are experts in this area, but hopefully it will help you understand a little bit about what makes pet food labels challenging, even for people who are experts in the field. There are a few pieces of information that are mandatory on the bag, so you will always find the name of the product, which seems pretty obvious, but it's a little more complicated than it seems. For example, the first product on the left says that it is real chicken and sweet potato recipe. And in order to say that, it actually has to have a very significant percentage of chicken and sweet potato in it. So it can't say that if it doesn't have at least 70% of those ingredients as the main ingredients in the bag after you consider that moisture is removed. When we look at the second one from the left, it is flaked tuna entree. So now it has the word entree after it, which means that it can be anywhere from 25% tuna all the way up to 70%. So it does have to have some tuna in it. It doesn't have to be all tuna. And then we go to choice cuts in gravy with beef. So that statement with, that word with, means that there needs to be at least 3% of the whole product has beef as a component. So 3% beef is not really that much. So the picture would imply that your dog is basically eating beautiful chunks of steak, and we can tell that it's between 3% and 25% because it says with beef. And then you have veterinary products, which will often be labeled according to their use, and they need to be able to substantiate that. For example, that Hills CD Multicare, if it has a label claim that says urinary care, then it needs to be good for that. So there are some regulations around labeling, but there can be misleading labels as well. So it is a challenge to know all those rules. Every bag or package or can needs to tell you how much is in it. And that seems obvious. That's true for all of our food packaging. But the reason why that matters is because a bag of food can look the same size as product B's bag of food, but actually contain a very different amount or different weight of material. So a 25 kilogram bag of dog food can look exactly the same as a 30 or 35 kilogram bag visually. When they're sitting next to each other on the shelf, it'd be very hard to tell that there's a several kilogram difference in those bags. Why does that matter? It matters because of cost. So really what you want to be able to do when you're comparing two foods on the basis of cost is you want to divide the cost for the bag by the weight of the bag. And that will give you a much more accurate idea of how much you're paying for the food per kilogram. And that can be very, like I said, misleading sometimes. So if you're concerned about cost, which everybody is pretty much concerned about cost, that will give you a much clearer idea than just looking at two bags that appear very similar. We talked about this in a previous session when we talked about questions to ask your pet food company, but you do want to make sure that the pet manufacturer's name and address is on the bag. And that is, in fact, a legal requirement. They do have to tell you who made it and where their street address or their local address. Basically, it needs to, if you wanted to send them a piece of mail, it needs to get to them. That's the amount of address that they need. We talked about the fact that it is recommended that they have a phone number so that you can contact them easily. But basically, this is the person who is going to take any responsibility if there's anything wrong with the food, so that you need to be able to reach them. So that'll be on the label. Whoo boy. This is the section that really is challenging. This is what makes it so hard. And that's the ingredient list. We pretty much all have a good understanding, I think, that the ingredient that there is the most of is going to appear at the top of the ingredient list. And then as we move down the ingredient list, the amounts become smaller. And I want to be really clear that that's weight. That's by weight of the raw ingredient as it's added into the diet. So that's really significant when we're looking at food and trying to assess. So here we have product A and product B, and they look completely different when you look at their label. They might have a few things that are similar. Some of the vitamins and minerals are similar. But really, what we've been taught is let's look at those first few and see what's going on there. So in product A, the first three ingredients are all meat-based, so turkey, chicken, and chicken broth. And then we have brown rice. Whereas in product B, we have whole grain corn, and then poultry byproduct meal, and then some animal fat after that. So in common thought, you might think that product A is clearly superior to product B because look at that. It starts right with whole meat right off the bat. This can be misleading. And I'm gonna delve into that a little bit further in a future talk, but it can be misleading because the turkey and the chicken, when they're added into the diet, that's whole turkey, whole chicken without the water removed. But we know that the water is going to come out during the processing, and water adds a significant amount of weight to the actual ingredient. When we look at poultry byproduct meal, and we're going to talk about byproducts later, meal means that meat has already had the water removed from it. So can we tell by looking at this label which of these two types of food has more chicken? We really can't. We do know that poultry byproduct meal is really high on the list, which means that there is a substantial weight component to that, and that there is no water associated with that weight. We know that in the turkey and chicken, there is still water. So this is when I said that it's really hard for experts even to tell food apart. There are so many things that can be misleading, and whether it's deliberately or it's just the way that they're written, it's really, really hard to tell. The other comment is that we hear sometimes is, oh, if it has words on the label that you can't pronounce, then it's not good. And really, most of the time in pet food, if it's an unfamiliar looking word, it's usually a vitamin or a mineral or some other nutrient that is designed to support good health, as opposed to being an additive. It is pretty rare for pet foods to have a lot of additional added color, for example, and many times the preservatives that are used are natural preservatives as opposed to artificial ones. So it is kind of hard to break that down and figure it out. Like I said, we're going to talk at a future time about that more. We talked about this in a previous session as well, so if you missed it, guaranteed analysis will always be present on the bag. It's going to give you information in particular about protein, fat, fiber, and moisture, and it will give those as minimums and maximums. So it doesn't give you exactly what's in the diet, but really more of an estimate of what's in there, and that is what's required to be on there as minimums and maximums. Some foods will also include an ash component. Usually that's a cat food because we used to worry that ash, which is the mineral content of the food, contributed to urinary disease. We have some more information about that now. And then it's optional to include things like calcium and phosphorus levels or vitamin E. This does not tell you exactly what's in there, though, so remember that the complete nutrient analysis is always more valuable than the guaranteed analysis. There will always be some sort of nutritional adequacy statement on the bag, and that's going to tell you what life stage this food is designed for. And the life stages that are typically identified are growth, maintenance, which is basically all the adults who aren't growing, and gestating or lactating, so if they're pregnant or if they're nursing. And usually growth and pregnant and nursing moms are considered to have similar nutrition needs. So this bag says animal feeding tests using AFCO procedures substantiate that Science Diet Puppy Health Development Small Bites provides complete and balanced nutrition. So you should always see that complete and balanced on a food that you plan to feed all the time. AFCO, AAFCO, is the American Association of Feed Control Officers, and they're the body that has established these guidelines. And they are voluntary, so people don't have to use them, but they are the most common body that people use when they're evaluating food. The big difference between these two labels is that the one on the left uses animal feeding tests, whereas the one on the right is formulated to meet the nutritional levels. So that one hasn't actually undergone feeding tests, or if they have, they haven't met the AFCO requirements for a feeding test. And so what they've done is they've basically made sure that they have the nutrients that meet the standards, but they haven't actually necessarily gone through a feeding test. So that you can decide how significant that is in your decision-making process. But if your label does not have a nutritional adequacy statement, I would be seriously concerned about using it as a food. There will be feeding instructions, and those feeding instructions vary a lot. So you can see on the left we have a really, really complicated feeding plan that is very targeted. So this is for a puppy who will be growing, and so we have a puppy's age in months, and we have their target adult weight. So you kind of have to know how big they're going to be when they get older, and there's ways to figure that out. And then it tells you, as they grow in age, how much is recommended to be fed each day. And so that's a very detailed feeding guideline, which I think is really great. It gives you really good starting point as you're feeding your puppy. On the other hand, often we have feeding directions on cans, sometimes very small cans in terms of cats. And so we will have much simpler feeding directions. So the one on the right says, if you're only feeding this food, feed 1 can daily for every 20 pounds of dog's body weight. And that is okay for them to say. That's as precise as they want to be. But that can be challenging for you to figure out for your particular dog exactly what to do. And feeding directions are always just a starting point, and then you need to reassess and make sure that that amount is working. Keep in mind that most manufacturers aim high. So be concerned if you're feeding exactly what's on the bag, that many, many animals will gain weight at that. So be ready to play around, and I would recommend talking to your veterinarian for the best way to go forward with feeding amount. There are all kinds of other label claims. There are tons of different things that people can put on labels that may or may not mean anything. So all natural, holistic, supreme, premium, there's all of these words, and some of them actually have meaning, and some of them are fancy sounding words that really don't mean anything, like premium or holistic. They really have no legal meaning at all. So in a future talk, we're actually going to talk a little bit more about terminology and what some of these words means and which ones you can ignore and which ones you can pay attention to. But that's just a little introduction to what you might see on the label. That's it for today. If you have any questions about reading pet food labels or comments about the presentation, I would love to hear from you. You can contact me at joye.sears@dal.ca, and we'll see you next time.